Please turn to page 66 for personal narrative writing at stage 6. At this level, the students will have a beginning, middle, end, but the difference between stage 5 and 6 is really in the beginning. In the beginning of the story, there will be a story opening, but instead of just selecting setting, character, action to make the story opening sentence, the students will have many different choices. They could start with dialogue, they could start with thoughts, they could start with setting, character, action. So they have more choices to begin their story. After that story opening sentence, then they will have a come alive box. And the come alive box is where they're going to reveal the personality of the characters. They're going to reveal the setting so that it comes alive. And there's many vivid descriptions in this come alive section of the story. So when we're looking at stage 6, we are adding a hook and a come alive box to replace the beginning of the story from stage 5, which was basically a story opening using SC arrow and then a couple of reactions or actions. Now we have our come alive box. We know the purpose of stage 6 is to add the come alive box and a different type of story opening. Let's look at the tools that you need in order to teach children stage 6 personal narrative writing. Plain paper, folded in a tri-fold, so that you have 3 boxes, the beginning, middle, end box. This is given to each child in the classroom. You would use this same plain paper and under a document viewer when you're first showing them how to do this lesson. Eventually, you're not doing the lesson with them, they're just following the steps to write their own story. Or you could have butcher paper if you don't want to use a document viewer, and you could have a large piece of butcher paper as you're walking them through the steps of how to do this particular stage. This is an example of what the organizer would look like. A line on the beginning box for a story opening, which could be dialogue, thoughts, or SC arrow. The box below is the come alive box. Then we have the middle section where we will sequence actions where the character will do, say, or think. And then we have our ending box where we'll have our ending action. Maybe we will have some reactions, some more actions at the end, and TCR, a reflection, that final thought of the story. So every student will have a plain piece of paper. Let's walk through the pages in the book that you need in order to teach this lesson. On page 66 is, of course, whenever you're introducing a new stage, you need to introduce to the students what they're doing. So we will have a chant. Page 67 is an at-a-glance sheet for you, the teacher, to use so that you can follow the steps with detailed directions on how to teach the children at a stage 6. Pages 68 and 69 finish up this section of personal narrative stage 6. On page 68, you have a checklist which gives you in detail what type of content and organization for the beginning, middle, and end of the story for a personal narrative requires at this particular stage. You also have in detail the types of sentences, what needs to be in these sentences at this stage, and then the mechanics. Also on this page, you have an at-a-glance chart that you would display for the students to see. This chart can be downloaded on a 8.5 by 14 piece of legal size paper in color. You can get this download in your table of contents in this online training. On the next page, you will see a sample organizer a child filled in, as well as a piece of writing at the end of the lesson. In addition to this stage 6 personal narrative writing, you will need tools from the tools section in this chapter. The first tool you'll need is on page 76. This is the narrative hooks page. For the story opening, we will now start calling the hook. That beginning of the story that you will write that will pull the reader in. In the boxes on this page are many different types of hooks that the children could use to start their story. Notice the top 3 boxes has the SC arrow, dialogue, and thoughts. That's what I primarily, at this particular stage, give children as a choice for that beginning opening of their story. Below it are 6 other boxes that give you other choices of how they could start their story. How I suggest that you prepare this sheet is you could keep it on one page, or you could turn it into a deck of cards. You could have all those different squares cut out and put on cards. When your children are ready to write their story opening, they could actually pick a card and use one of these different types of story openings, or they could just choose the one that they prefer. On page 77, you will find the do, say, think cards. When we're writing our personal narrative, the types of sentences that we can write could be actions where a character is going to do something, or different types of reactions, and those are sentences where we could have dialogue or reveal the character's thoughts. On page 96 is the narrative transition card. Notice the different columns that have different transitions that children can use to start sentences all throughout their story. On page 98 and 99, you will find the 5 senses cards. These are cards that your students will be able to look at so they can see, do I need to add vivid descriptions, saying what something sounds like, feels like, smells like, tastes like, looks like, and the heart is for emotion words or personality descriptions. I also suggest that you fill some beads in a salt and pepper shaker, so when you do add fancy words, you can have this wonderful little manipulative to say, add fancy words. On page 100 and 101, you will find the story ending chart. This is a chart that you could display in your classroom with different transitions and reflection words so that your students can finish their story with that reflection statement. It's a wonderful chart for your students to use to come up with ideas for that last sentence of their story. Let's start with our personal narrative, stage 6 writing lesson. Boys and girls, we're going to write a personal narrative at stage 6. Let's do our chant so that we know all the parts of the lesson. First of all, put your hands up with the letter T and say, a personal narrative is a true story about myself that's memorable. And we know when something's memorable, something happened to us that made us happy, sad, angry, upset, embarrassed, scared. And because we had that emotion, it's an important story to tell people. That's why we tell personal narratives. So let's say the entire chant so we know all parts of the story. Let's start again. A personal narrative is a true story about myself that's memorable. And we know that it has a beginning, middle, end. Let's go to the beginning. In the beginning, I need to make the setting and myself come alive. And the reason why we need to make them come alive is so that we seem real, so that you understand who we are. Once we come alive in the beginning, then we'll go to the middle. In the middle are actions, 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 where I do, say, and think. The end, what happened to me at the end of the story. And then reflection. What did I think, wish, or feel after this experience? We have our personal narrative writing chant that we just told the kids, and we want to make it really clear to them. Boys and girls, we've already in stage 5 had a beginning, middle, end. What's different? Our beginning. And we are saying that in the beginning, we need to make ourselves come alive. The come alive box was part of our introductory lessons at the beginning of the narrative chapter. That box was absolutely critical to start introducing to students right at the beginning of the year. So when we're finally at stage 6 in narrative writing, this is something they're familiar with. So the importance of that introductory lesson is now going to be evident at stage 6, where we're going to make a come alive box. And I can tell the students, boys and girls, we've been making the come alive boxes so that we could make ourselves and our setting come alive. So when someone reads our story, we seem real. No one wants to read a story where someone doesn't seem real. Then it's boring and they want to close the book. So what do we need to do? We need to make our story have a come alive box so we seem real and people want to keep reading, because no one wants to read a story where someone doesn't seem real. We have our chant. A personal narrative is a true story about myself that's memorable. In the beginning, we need to make myself and the setting come alive. In the middle are actions, actions, actions where we do, say, or think. The end. What happened to me at the end of the story? Reflection. What did I think? How did I feel? Or what did I wish after this experience happened to me? Those are all the parts of our story. Let's go to our organizer and let's start planning. Here's our organizer. It's a legal size piece of paper, 8.5 by 14 inches, and it's on the landscape position. Before we mark the organizer or even make it, we are writing a personal narrative and we know it's a true story, so it has already happened. So the first thing we need to do is step 1, just tell the story. When you first introduce stage 6 to your students, you need to make sure that you're all writing the same story because you're following the stage 6 steps. It's critical that your students learn the steps of how to plan a story at this stage. If everyone in your room had a different story while you're trying to introduce these steps, it's too difficult. You have to basically go around one-on-one, understand what their story is to help them as you guide them through the steps. Therefore, we want to have one story that we're working with in order to teach the steps. Once they learn the steps, then they'll write their own story. So before you start this lesson, you need to have a story prepared. Let's go back to page 52. On page 52 is our chart in which we have different emotion faces, like this is our happy face, with words that mean happy, joyful, exuberant, delighted. And then we have pictures of various different stories in which things happened that made that person happy. These are pictures that I drew of different experiences that made me happy when I was the age of the children in my classroom. I'm not telling them experiences that happened to me as an adult because I want to use stories that are going to be child-friendly. You don't need to come up with true stories. I just made some of these stories up and pretended like they happened to me at this age. When I reveal this chart to the students, I show them, look at this. These are things that happened to me when I was your age that made me happy. I had a present, and inside the present was a puppy. But at first, I thought it was a present that was alive and moving around, and it scared me. Over here, I lost my tooth. I'm going to tell you that story. Oh, jump over here where I was embarrassed. I had fallen, and everyone saw me. Or I came to school, and I was dressed up, but it wasn't dress-up day. I have all these different types of stories here. We're going to choose one of them to use in our lesson. The other piece that's really important here on this chart is students do have their own stories. When they have experiences they want to share, I give them a Post-it, and then they write their name on the Post-it and a picture of that experience, and they put it underneath the emotion. So when I'm doing these lessons with the students, and they finally are writing their own story, they can look at this chart. If they can't come up with ideas, they could use one that's on the chart, or they can look at a story that another student has told in the class to refer to. So you don't have to get stumped with coming up with a story. If they can't come up with their own, then use one that's on our board. Turn back to page 68. While we're doing our lesson, we're going to be using our legal size piece of paper, but you may want to have this page open so that you can follow along on the chart the different steps in our lesson. Notice the first step you see says, tell the story. That's because it's a personal narrative. It's supposed to be a story that's true, so it already happened. You don't have to figure out, how can I make this story interesting? What next part could I add? It's already a story that happened. So first thing you do at this level is you tell the story. We have our tools. We have a way to come up with stories. Everyone has their legal size sheet of paper in front of them. We are ready to begin our lesson. We've done our chant, and now we're looking at step 1 of our directions. And step 1 says, tell the story. So I tell the children, boys and girls, here's the story that we're going to use today. Why are we all writing the same story? So we can learn the steps. And when we learn the steps, we can write our own story. That's right. I'm going to tell the story. This is something that happened to me, And the reason why I'm telling this story is because the emotional reaction I had was two. I actually had two emotional reactions. First, something happened to me and it made me very, very upset. And then the emotion turned into something that was hilarious. I will tell you that story. When I was your age, I was at my grandma's house and we went there every Sunday. We had a big dinner at grandma's. And this was a special Sunday because it was my dad's birthday. And I was in the kitchen with my mom because I was chosen this year to light the candles on my dad's birthday. I was so excited. It was special for me, that's for sure. I was in the kitchen lighting the candles on my dad's birthday cake. My mom was in there. We put 50 candles on the cake. When we lit it, it looked like a forest fire. I couldn't believe how many candles were on this cake. It was unbelievable. It was on fire. I was so excited. I said to my mom, "Mom, look at Dad's cake. I feel like I'm in a forest that's on fire." It was hilarious. My mom started laughing at me and patting my back and said, "Don't tell Dad that." So we lit the cake, and there's the beginning of our story. After I lit the cake, I got to carry it out to the dining room. So I picked up the cake, and remember, there's a lot of candles on it, and I'm your age, so it's a lot to carry this. And I'm walking out to the dining room and I'm all excited. Everyone kind of sees me with the cake and everyone's getting excited because everyone loves cake. Then, right on the floor in front of me, you wouldn't believe it, my 3 cousins are sound asleep. They're like 3 logs just laying one after the other. I see them and I'm thinking, oh no, I have to get over these 3. I can't get to the table. So I have to tippy-toe, carefully crossing over each one of my cousins, holding on to that cake. Whew, that was a close one. So I'm walking over to the table. I'm so excited. And that's when it happened. You're not going to believe it. My shoelace was undone. I stepped on it, didn't even realize it. When I was ready to take another step, I tripped, and that's when the horrible event happened. The cake went flying out of my hands, and it twirled through the air. Oh, it was awful. It was awful. I looked like this. I had my hands up in the air. I was screaming, no. Everyone at the table had their hands up in the air going, no. And they're putting their hands across their face, hoping they don't get cake all over them. And then the cake went splat all over the middle of the table. Food was everywhere. Chunks of cake hit all my different relatives. It was awful. And I thought, I ruined my dad's birthday. I started to cry. I was so upset. My dad looked around at everybody at the table. He had this little smirk on his face. And that's when everything changed. He grabbed that big chunk of cake that landed on his face. He looked around at everybody and he said, "Food fight, cake fight," and started throwing cake at everybody. And that was hilarious. Everyone started grabbing chunks of cake and throwing it at each other and eating it. It was probably the best birthday I've ever been at. There's my story. Once I finish telling the story, then I need to, step 2, get organized. I need to make my organizer. We go to our piece of paper together, and the children and I are going to draw the organizer. Let's make all the parts. All the students need to do is draw a line on each fold. Then they have a beginning, middle, and end box. Let's go to the beginning box. What did we say needs to happen in the beginning of the box? You need to make yourself and the setting come alive. So we're going to have a line at the top for our story opening, which could be SC arrow, or it could be dialogue or thoughts. And right below that, we're going to draw a box, and that's going to be our come alive box, where we're going to make the beginning of the story come alive by adding vivid descriptions, figurative language, and make yourself seem real. In the middle, we'll leave blank because we'll add our actions in the middle as we go through our plan. We don't know how many are going to be there yet. At the end, we're going to draw a line halfway through the top. And then down at the bottom, we're going to leave a lot of room here because we don't know how many more actions or reactions we'll have at the end. until we plan. So right at the bottom, we're going to write TCR for our story reflection, that story closing, transition character reflection. We have our organizer. What are our steps that we go through when we fill in our organizer? First, we need to identify the beginning. So we'll do our Come Alive box. Just drawing a picture in our Come Alive box so we know what the beginning of our story is about. Then we'll jump to the next step where we'll draw our ending, just so we identify the end. Once we have our beginning identified and our end identified, then we'll go to the middle and we will actually sequence out the do, say, or think actions in the story for the middle. Once we have all that done, then we'll go back and fill in all of our Come Alive box, our transitions in the middle, our ending actions and reactions, and finally our reflection. So let's get started. First thing we need to do is go to our Come Alive box. And in this box, what are we going to do is draw a picture of what was happening. I'm ready to draw my Come Alive box. In order to come alive, I always have to think about the word ape, the character. A is for appearance. P is personality. E is emotion. So first, let's go to appearance. What would I look like in this picture? Let's go to personality. What kind of personality do I have? Or E, emotion. How am I feeling? Once I think about that, as I draw the picture should reflect that, because I want to make that Come Alive box reveal who I am and how I feel. I need to think about this before I draw the picture. So right away, I'm going to say, wow, I was so excited. So I was excited, I was thrilled, my mom was proud of me. I have all those feelings. So when I draw this picture, I need to show a picture of an excited girl. So my eyes are going to be really big. I am going to have a big, wide smile. I'm showing myself lighting the candles. Notice, this is not a big art project. I just have quick little pictures here. Here's my mom smiling at me, patting my back. That's going to be her hand, the stick there. So excited. Give my mom a little bit of hair. We're in the kitchen. We have the cake on the table. So here's my mom patting me on the back. I'm looking at the cake and I'm lighting it. Quick, fast picture. Once we have that, then I'm going to jump to the end. What happened at the end? So I'm not writing the sentence, I'm just drawing a quick picture. See how we're doing this? A picture in the beginning, so I know, okay, the beginning I'm just doing this part of the story where I'm lighting the candles and I'm excited. Jump to the end. So what happens at the end here? What will I draw a picture of? Instead of drawing a picture, maybe I'm just going to put the word cake fight. That's it. I know that the cake fight will start there at that box. I'm not going to put it in the middle. Why is this important to identify the beginning and the end? Because kids tend to say a story and then they tend to write everything at the beginning instead of developing the story and sequencing out all the actions and reactions. They just tell you what happened right away. So you have to identify, here's my beginning, here's my end. Once I have my beginning and my end identified, then I can put my actions in the middle. What happened from me lighting a cake to a cake fight? How did I get from lighting candles on my dad's cake to everyone in my family throwing chunks of the cake and having a cake fight? Sometimes it's difficult for kids to sequence out the middle of the story. So once we have the beginning and end labeled, in order to sequence out the middle, so they really stretch it out and they have all those actions and reactions, what we do is we silent movie it. Let's go to the beginning of the story. I'm lighting the cake. I'm not going to talk anymore. We're going to have a silent movie and we're just going to act out the story. Because when you silent movie it, what happens is that you end up having frames, almost like on a movie strip. And those frames are going to be the different actions and reactions in the story. So here we go. Let's do the beginning box. So we just went through that story, acting out each part. In the beginning, what did we act out? I was lighting the cake. I already have that. After we acted out the cake, I said, okay, we already have that in our beginning box. Let's go to the next action. That's number 1. So I picked up the cake. I'm walking and I have to walk over my cousins. I see my cousins sleeping sound asleep on the floor and I have to tiptoe over them. There's the second one. Then I'm walking towards the table and trip over my shoelace. That's the third one. Then the cake starts flying through the air. That's the fourth one. Everyone's yelling, no! That's the fifth one. The cake splats on the table. That's the sixth one. And then my dad has a cake fight. Oop, that's at the ending, so I don't need that one. How many actions were in the middle? 6. So we go to our middle and we write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Notice I'm stretching that all the way down the page. Put a half line across that middle box. The reason why we're doing the half line is that's where we'll write our transitions or the marker words. Those are the words before dialogue or thoughts, like my dad said, or we all shouted, that type of thing. We had our beginning drawn, our ending. Now we're listing 6 actions in the middle. We'll go back to the first one. After we identified that there were 6, then we're going to go back to the first one and we'll act it out again. This is important. So we lit the cake. Let's go to the first action. What do we do? Picked up the cake. I'm going to draw a picture of myself picking up the cake. Notice I drew a picture of myself picking up the cake, a fast sketch. These can be stick people. It really doesn't matter, just as long as you can identify what's going on in that scene. Or if students don't feel comfortable with drawing a picture, a keyword, 1 or 2 keywords, that's it. You don't want them writing it out, just a couple of keywords to remind them what's going on there. So we acted out. Oh, I picked up the cake. All right, what happened next? And then the kids are acting, oh, that's right, we were stepping over our cousins. Okay, draw a picture or write a couple of words to remind you what happened there. I'm going to draw a picture of 3 stick people with a line going over them to show I had to walk over my 3 cousins. Again, it doesn't have to be an in-depth drawing. It's just a reminder of what's happening in that scene. Next, so I'm walking over my cousins. Let's go to the next action. I tripped on my shoelace, so we all acted that out, and the kids will yell, oh, you tripped on your shoelace. What happens is, I may draw the picture in front of them, but maybe this time I'll say, what are you going to do? I'm not going to draw the picture yet. You draw it, or write a key word to remind what happened there. So at this point, have the kids start doing that. You don't want them to think that they have to copy everything that you're doing. So I'll walk around the room and I'll look at the different drawings and I'll say, ooh, I'm going to use your drawing. So I have a person's drawing where they had a shoe with a shoelace, where they tripped over it, and an arrow. Oh no, I tripped over my shoelace. Let's go to the next action. Let's act it out. So I tripped over my shoelace, and what happened? The cake went flying through the air. All right, so we're going to have a cake, and we're going to show how it went flying through the air. What happened next? So the cake goes flying through the air, and then what happens? Everyone's shouting, no! In this case, everyone's shouting no, so we have our dialogue. We need to show this template to the students where, okay, we have our line, comma, dialogue bubble, and then we're going to write what we said. Quotation mark, no! Close quotation mark. Now we'll go over who shouted this. Everyone, the entire family. So let's write the entire family shouted. And notice I don't have a lot of room here, so I'm just going to squeeze it in, or right below the line. The entire family shouted, comma, no. Finally, so they're all shouting, no! Then what happened? And the kids are acting it out. The cake splats on the table. So you can either write cake explodes, or you could just show a cake exploding on the table, all the pieces going everywhere. Notice I just drew a cake. I drew the table, I drew the cake, and some arrows that it went everywhere. Again, no details in the pictures, fast sketches. We have all the sequent actions in the middle. We know at the end we had a cake fight. Let's look at our ending. Can we expand it a little bit more? And remember, I'm not writing sentences yet. I'm just making the little frames of the story. So at the end, we know that my dad grabbed some cake and threw it. There was a cake fight. Do we want to add another action? Maybe all my cousins throwing cake at each other. Maybe my entire family throws cake in return. Or I could have someone shouting something. Or I could have people thinking things. We have our cake fight at the end. My dad grabs the chunk of cake and throws it. After he throws it, he shouts, "Let's have a cake fight." We'll draw a line, put a dialogue bubble, comma. What did he say? Let's have a cake fight. Let's have a cake fight. Uh-oh, we already are going to say cake fight up here. So what do I need to do? Let's write cake fight here. But at the top, let's erase cake fight. And maybe we'll just change it to my dad throwing the cake. That way, we know we don't want him have a cake fight plus say cake fight. So we'll say he grabbed a chunk of cake and threw it. And then said, let's have a cake fight. So my dad grabbed cake. Let's act it out. Grab cake, threw it. Let's have a cake fight. Who said it? My dad. And when my dad said it, did he say or yelled? Or shouted? Which one would sound better? When I hear the word yelled, it sounds mean, like someone's angry. Which one should we choose? Shouted. That doesn't sound angry, does it? So we write, my dad shouted, let's have a cake fight. Let's walk through this ending again, acting it out to see if we want to add any more in our story. Grab the cake and throw it. Shout, let's have a cake fight. Do we want to add anything else? So he throws it, let's have a cake fight. Anything else happening? Act it out, boys and girls. So I asked my students to act out what was happening. And then they act as if they're all throwing cake at each other. So we should have the entire family. Let's add an action, make our table, and then show people throwing cake at each other. We have all the parts of our story drawn on our organizer. We haven't made sentences yet. We're just organizing all the different actions in our story, all the different scenes. The beginning of our story, we're going to make come alive with me lighting the cake. We have all of our actions in our story in the middle, sequenced, and they make sense. And we also have our ending actions. How did we do this? We drew our beginning, just the ending action that we had, my dad throwing the cake, in order to identify what went in the middle. After we did all that, then we came back to the end and said, do we want to add more? Yes, we do. So we had dialogue and that ending action of the whole family having a food fight. Once we have all this in place, we are ready to go form our sentences by first coming up with our come alive box, coming up with the sentences there, then adding transitions to the middle to make the middle sentences, transitions in the end, and our TCR. Let's get to work. Go to our first box where we're going to make it come alive. We've done come alive boxes in our introductory lessons, so we already know what do we need to do. We look at the box and say, label the nouns. We're going to look at what needs to be described in this picture. This is the appearance. What do I need to describe? Well, first I have to label it with a noun. So maybe I'm going to describe my eyes. Because if I describe my eyes, you're going to feel how excited I was. What else could I describe in this picture? Oh, the cake. Because that's an important part of this story is the cake. And the candles. Let's write candles. Anything else I need to describe in this picture? How about just my mom? I have the nouns labeled. Notice I only chose 4. 4 to 5 is plenty. You're not going in and starting a story with a description that takes so long, the reader loses track of what the story is even about. You're just identifying what key things in this picture need to be revealed so that the reader understands how the setting feels, what kind of character it is, so that they come alive. After this, we're going to add adjectives. Let's see, what kind of eyes would I have? Don't forget that when we did our Come Alive boxes, I had many different descriptive word banks. On page 38, I have a descriptive word bank that describes all the different features of a person, from their hair, their eyes, their lips, nose, legs, arms, etc. If your students are having a difficult time coming up with ways to describe the eyes, then they can go to their appearance word bank and look at some ideas that we have there. Let's look at what we have. Do any of these words help us describe how excited I was? Because my eyes are really big and I'm excited. What words could I use? So I have sly, irresistible, tantalizing, wild, bold, maybe wild, I don't know. Let's see, fiery, that still seems like it's not hitting what I want because I'm excited. Let's see, what else do I have? Bright eyes, perky eyes, sparkling eyes, dazzling eyes, animated eyes. We have so many different descriptive words there that we could choose from. After we look at our list, maybe we can come up with bright eyes. That would work. Don't forget to use these different word banks. If your kids can't come up with adjectives, verbs, nouns, any descriptions, go to your word bank so that they can get ideas. That's what they were there for, and they were used to using them when they write their Come Alive boxes. After using our word bank, we'll write the word bright above the word eyes, because when we're forming the sentence, we want to have the adjective before the noun. We go to our next noun, cake. Always using the question, the adjective question sentence. What kind of, and then putting the noun in. Let's do that with candles. What kind of candles would be on my dad's cake? Because there were so many candles, maybe we'll just use the number 50. So there were 50 candles on my dad's cake. What kind of cake was I putting the candles on? We'll just write the word birthday, a birthday cake. What kind of mom was helping me light the candles? Remember, she's patting me on the back. How does she feel about me? My proud mom. After labeling each noun with an adjective, we'll go back and see if we can add a powerful verb. Verbs are the most powerful part of speech. Everyone knows that. Let's see if we can add a powerful verb to our nouns. Go back to my proud mom. What did my proud mom do in this picture? Oh, she patted me on the back. Let's write patted. What did my bright eyes do as I looked at the candles? Ooh, I could say stared, but I think I'm going to use the word gazed, because stared sometimes means something's weird or odd. But if I gaze at something, then I'm smiling and I'm really happy. What action could I have for the birthday cake? Sometimes you can't come up with action words, or I could say the birthday cake was decorated with. So let's put the word decorated there. We don't know if we're going to use that or not. We're just going to put those ideas. The 50 candles. What did the 50 candles do? Ooh, let's write glowed. We have our adjective, nouns, and verbs for our Come Alive box. Last thing we want to do is say, boys and girls, should we add figurative language? Does something in this box need to pop in the reader's mind? We look at all the different parts that we described and decided, you know what? Let's circle and put a box by the 50 candles glowed. What kind of figurative language could we use? We could have hyperbole, exaggeration. The 50 candles glowed so brightly that they lit up the entire town. Ooh, that would be pretty funny. That'd be great to show how many candles were on the cake. Or the 50 candles glowed like a forest fire. We used a simile there. Let's use that one. Like and then I'm just going to put trees there so I can remember like a forest fire. I have one spot that I made come alive with figurative language. Again, all these steps have been practiced and learned by students if they were doing the come alive box right from the beginning of the year. We've labeled the parts so that the appearance is going to come alive with our adjective, nouns, and verbs, as well as figurative language. The next thing we need to decide on is revealing the personality or emotion. So to reveal your personality or how you're feeling in this picture. And I think we'll go to how we're feeling: excited, thrilled, proud of ourselves. So how could I do that? I could do that by having dialogue or thoughts, or I could describe just how I am feeling using describing words like excited and thrilled. Or maybe I could reveal how I felt by talking about my body. In other words, I felt proud of myself, so I held my head up high as I gazed at the candles. It's important that we give kids many different ways to reveal their emotions or their personality. Dialogue, thoughts, what the body's doing, or just saying the emotion words, excited and thrilled. At this point, I'm going to say to the kids, how can we reveal how we're feeling? Maybe we say something. Do we want to have what we say to start our story, or do we want that in the middle of our Come Alive box? Let's start our story with it. What could we say to show how excited we are? Look at me, Mom. I'm lighting the candles on my own. That's a great way to show how thrilled you are, but it also is a great beginning. Maybe we could do that. We could begin our story with setting character action, just saying what I'm doing right away, and the setting. We could start with me saying something or thinking something. Maybe I'm thinking, I can't believe my mom is letting me light the candles. That would be a great way too, and have a thinking bubble. So there's many different ways that you can reveal an emotion, and when you do decide on that, you can decide, do I want to put that up here on my story opening line, the hook in the reader, or do I want to put it in the middle of my Come Alive box so I can have that dialogue or thought in the middle of my description? Let's say that we decided we're going to start our story with dialogue or thought. So we're going to go over here. We have our dialogue bubble on our line. And what are we going to say to reveal how excited we are? Look, Mom, I'm lighting the candles on my own. So we're going to put our quotation marks. Look, Mom, exclamation point. I am lighting the candles. Close quotation marks. We decided to start our entire paper, the story opening, the hook, with dialogue. Again, we don't have to start with dialogue. We could have had a thought. We could have SC arrow. We decided to have our story opening, the hook to pull in the reader would be the dialogue. Because look, Mom, I am lighting the candles. That's going to pull a reader in, like, what's going on? And it also quickly reveals how the character feels, excited and thrilled. So I could just start with, look, Mom, I'm lighting the candles. I shouted, I exclaimed. Or I could even add more to this story opening hook. I could add an emotion to my marker. Instead of just I exclaimed, I could put excited and thrilled, I exclaimed. Let's put that. Excited and thrilled. Excited and thrilled, I exclaimed. Look, Mom, I am lighting the candles. That's a great hook. That's a great story opening to pull in the reader. We have our story opening, our hook, which is the dialogue. We have all of our parts of our Come Alive box labeled. We're ready to orally rehearse this part of the story. Let's do it. Make sure you act it out as well. Excited and thrilled, I exclaimed, look, Mom, I'm lighting the candles on my own. Remember, when you're orally rehearsing this, you can also change it around. It doesn't have to be exact. This is also a part where you're revising. My proud mother patted me on the back as I lit 50 candles on my dad's birthday cake. I don't like that. Let's do it again. Excited and thrilled, I exclaimed, look, Mom, I am lighting the candles on my cake. My proud mom patted me on the back as my bright eyes gazed at my dad's birthday cake. That sounds pretty good. I lit 50 candles that glowed like there was a forest fire set in the kitchen. That sounds pretty good. Notice I'm stopping, fixing it, going back, rehearsing it, adding more words. I think I'm going to say it one more time. Excited and thrilled, I exclaimed, "Look, Mom, I'm lighting all the candles on my own." Notice I changed it a little bit. My proud mother patted me on the back as my bright eyes gazed at my dad's birthday cake decorated with colorful frosting. I was lighting 50 candles on the top of his cake that glowed like a forest fire, filling the entire kitchen. That sounds fabulous. So I went through and I orally rehearsed this over and over. The students and I are doing this together. We're coming up with many different ways to practice the beginning. Now I ask them to turn to their buddy and read the beginning of the story on their own with their Come Alive box. They all start reading it. I walk around and I check for their language. Once we have that down pretty well, we're ready to move to the middle of the box. This is where we're going to form the sentences here in the middle and add transitions as well. When we form these sentences, we always start with the picture and we say, who's doing the action in this picture? What is that person doing? So that way we come up with the base sentence. Once we come up with that, then we see if we want to add a transition to start the sentence with, or we just start with that first word that we made the base sentence with. Let's try. Who's doing the action? I am. What did I do? I picked up the birthday cake and walked out of the kitchen. I picked up the birthday cake and walked to the dining room to serve it to my dad. There you go. That sounds pretty good. Do we want to add a transition? I could write the word I on this box, or I could have a transition. I'll look at my transition page, come up with some ideas there, but I want to say to the kids, how did I get from lighting the candles to picking up the cake and walking out of the kitchen? So maybe I could say, after lighting the candles. Ooh, I already said candles here. So what else could I do? I could say afterwards, maybe, or I'm so excited about taking the cake out. Maybe I could just say, how did I take the cake out? Quickly. Or how did I take the cake out? Carefully. I picked up the cake. There's our word. Carefully, I picked up the cake and carried it out to the table. I carried it out to present it to my dad at the dining room table. See how many times we go over this. The kids and you will come up with different ideas. Now we go back. Carefully, I picked up the cake to present it to my dad at the dining room table. We've said our sentence. Sounds great. We've said it over and over again. Look at the number 2 here in the middle. Always go to the picture or the key words that you've written down and ask, who's doing the action in this picture? Well, my cousins are sleeping on the floor, but I'm doing the action. I had to tiptoe over them while they were sleeping on the floor. So what did I have to do? I had to tiptoe over my 3 cousins who were sound asleep on the floor or sleeping like some logs on the floor. So I have, carefully, I picked up the cake and carried it out to present to my dad for his birthday. I had to step over my cousins who were sleeping like a bunch of logs lying on the floor. I could just begin this sentence with I, but I don't want to do that. I'm carrying the cake and I want to transition to stepping over my cousins. So maybe I could begin with on the way. I had to step over my cousins who were sleeping like a bunch of logs on the floor. That sounds smoother. I'm letting the reader know I'm going to this frame where I have to step over my cousins. So I'm letting them know on the way to the table. On the way, I had to step over my cousins who were sleeping like a bunch of logs on the floor. Next picture. Who's doing the action? I am. What did I do? I tripped on my shoelace. Again, I could start with I, but how did I trip on my shoelace? Suddenly. So maybe I could use suddenly. I tripped on my shoelace. Go to the next sentence. Who's doing the action? The cake is doing the action. What did the cake do? The cake went flying through the air, tumbling through the air. So I could just say, the cake went tumbling through the air. Maybe I could start it with a sound effect. Whoosh! The cake went flying through the air. The entire family shouted no. We have all these actions. Carefully, I picked up the cake to carry it out to my dad. On the way, I had to tiptoe over my 3 cousins that were sleeping like logs on the floor. Suddenly, I tripped on my shoelace. Whoosh! The cake went flying through the air. My entire family shouted, no! Let's go to the last one. Who's doing the action? The cake. What did the cake do? The cake landed. The cake exploded. Which one do we want to use? Let's use exploded. The cake exploded when it landed on the table. The cake exploded all over my family when the cake exploded on everyone's faces and bodies when it landed on the table. Ooh, that sounds good. Do we want to just say the cake started, the cake exploded? Sure, let's do that. Let's start with the word the. The cake exploded on everyone's faces and bodies when it landed on the table. Let's go to the last box. So who's doing the action? My dad. What did he do? He grabbed a chunk of cake and he threw it. I need to transition to this action because down here, the cake splattered over everybody. Now I'm going over here to the end of the story and some time went by. I need to make my audience aware that time went by. And it seemed like it was forever. So maybe I could say something like, after only a few seconds, but what seemed like hours, my dad grabbed a piece of cake and threw it at everybody. And playfully threw it at everybody. Or I could transition, showing what everyone was doing. While everyone froze in their seats, maybe I could do that. Maybe I'll put the word while here and start that phrase. While my entire family froze in their seats, my dad grabbed a chunk of cake and started throwing it. My dad, I already said my dad up there. I'm going to write the word he, just to remind myself. He shouted, let's have a cake fight, my dad shouted. Go to the next picture. My family. Let's not say family because we keep saying that over and over again. Let's just use the word everybody. Everybody, action. What were they doing here? Everyone started throwing cake. So let's begin our sentence here with everybody. Everybody started throwing cake. We have our beginning sentences for our Come Alive box, the middle of our story with actions, reactions. We have our ending. The last sentence is the reflection sentence, that last sentence to know that the story is over. I have the secret formula, TCR, in order to form this sentence. Many children have a difficult time ending their stories. So I came up with transition, character reflection, because this not only lets the reader know the story is over, it's a wonderful way to end the story, for the writer to look back at this experience to say how they felt, what they wished, what they learned, what they discovered, some way to reflect on this experience. So let's look at the TCR. T is for transition, but this is a transition that is for a reflection. These transition phrases could be forever after, from that day on, looking back, once the fight was over, when I look back at this time. These are different ways that I could transition. Then we have our C, character. I have to use the word I because I'm telling the story. And then I have to decide on my reflection. Do I want to say what I learned, what I felt, what I wished, what I discovered? I'm going to have to decide on that. Let's go to our transition first. I give kids many different ideas. I had shown you before the lesson that you could even have a transition character reflection chart with many different transitions listed on it. Maybe this time we chose from that day on. The kids may have written a different transition. It doesn't matter. Character, I'm going to use the word I. And then my reflection. At this point, I'm going to model to the students many different types of reflections using the different words: learned, wished, realized, discovered, felt. So I may say to them, from that day on, I'm going to have a reflection, boys and girls. I'm going to look at this story and what did I wish after this story was over? From that day on, I wished every birthday party could end in a food fight. What if I could put what I learned? From that day on, I learned that my dad was the greatest dad in the entire world. Or, from that day on, I learned my dad had a great sense of humor. What else could I do? What would I discover? From that day on, I discovered that birthday cake tastes better when it explodes on the table than if you cut it with a knife. So these are fun ways to end your story and give kids clever ideas that are filled with their personality and flair, also known as voice. You've modeled different ways to reflect on your story. Maybe I've decided wished is what I want to put as my reflection. From that day on, I wish, and maybe my reflection is going to be that every birthday party ends with a food fight. And I just write food fight there to remind me that's what I want. I have my beginning, middle, and end. All the ideas and sentences formed on my organizer. We go through and we orally rehearse this entire organizer. Excited and thrilled, I exclaimed, "Look, Mom, I'm lighting Dad's candles on his cake all by myself." My proud mother patted me on my back as my bright eyes gazed at my dad's cake. 50 candles glowed on top of it, making it look like a forest fire was lit in our kitchen. Carefully, I picked up the cake and waltzed out to the dining room table in order to present it to my dad. On the way, I had to tiptoe over my cousins. Suddenly, I tripped over my shoelace. Whoosh! The cake went flying through the air. My entire family shouted, "No!" The cake landed on the table and exploded all over my family. While we all froze in our chairs, my dad grabbed a chunk of cake and started throwing it. He shouted, "Let's have a cake fight." Everyone started throwing morsels of cake at each other. From that day on, I wished every birthday party could end with a cake fight. I have all my ideas. We rehearsed it over and over again. Let's go back and see if we can add any fancy words. We don't need to do it to the beginning. We already did that. We're going to look at each one of these sentences and decide, does anything in these sentences need to be described? Carefully, I picked up the cake, cradled it in my hands. Ooh, so maybe I could say picked up the cake, but I can put cradled it so that you can really see I was holding it carefully. Cradled it in my hands and walked towards the dining room table. So I'm going to put picked up the cake, comma, cradled it, comma, and I felt proud, so I could say walk towards the table, but maybe I could put waltzed. So look what I'm doing. I'm adding fancy words, but in this case, I may add some verbs or adjectives. Carefully, I picked up the cake, cradled it in my hands, and waltzed towards the dining room table. On the way, I had to tiptoe over my 3 cousins who looked like a bunch of logs. I think I'm going to put logs here so I don't forget that, sleeping on the floor. So I'm going through and I'm adding some sort of describing words, more vivid nouns or vivid descriptions using adjectives or figurative language. Suddenly, I tripped over my shoelace. So I'm just going to keep it that way. Suddenly, I tripped over my shoelace. Whoosh! The cake went flying through the air because it's flipping around. Maybe I could put that, flipped and tumbled in the air. Yeah, that sounds great. Whoosh, the cake flipped and tumbled through the air. Love it. My entire family shouted, the entire family, or I think I'll put my here instead. My entire family shouted, "No!" The cake exploded on the table. So we're going to write exploded. The cake exploded when it landed on the table, covering my family with pastry. That's good. I'm going to write the word pastry there just so that I don't forget that. So notice I'm just writing keywords. While we all froze in our seats, my dad picked up a chunk of the cake and threw it. I could say my silly dad, but then instead of saying threw, maybe I say flung it. That sounds better. Flung it. This is so good. My dad, no, we already changed that to he. He shouted, "Let's have a food fight." Everyone picked up chunks of cake and continued the craziness. Ooh, that sounds good. Maybe I'll put craziness there. From that day on, I wished every birthday party could end in a food fight. We have our describing words. If your students can say this and they can write down all the sentences with capitals and periods, they're ready to go write. But if you know, my kids have a tough time with punctuation, capitalization, putting the commas in place, then you're going to want to have them label with red all the punctuation and capitalization. So you put up your red pen and you say, punctuation time, let's mark our papers. We go back, we have our red pens, and we write capitals at the beginning of our sentences, like the excited and thrilled. I'm going to capitalize the E here. I'm going to trace over the E with the red. To make sure that I remember, I put a capital there. I'll have my comma, I'll have my quotation marks. Anything that needs to be capitalized or any punctuation, I'm going to go back and I'm going to label with my red pen. The labeling of the different sentences is a fabulous way for you to help your kids remember to put all those marks as they write. If they already do it, you don't need this step in your paper. If you have some kids who don't need to label the capitals and punctuation, they've already orally rehearsed their paper, they're ready to go, they go and write. Your kids that need it, they can continue with you in the lesson. You together are going to label where the capitals, the commas, the quotation marks, the periods, exclamation points will go in their paper. So we'll go through our paper and we'll label it. My proud mom patted me on the back. Ooh, I think I'm going to put the word my there to remember that. As my bright eyes gazed at my dad's birthday cake decorated with colorful frosting. So I'm going to put a period here. I know that that's turning into a sentence. The 50 candles, I'll put the word the there. The 50 candles glowed so brightly it looked like there was a forest fire in the kitchen. So I'll put a period there. So I'm going through and I'm adding my capitals, my starter words. I have that all done. Let's go to the middle carefully, comma. I picked up the cake, comma, cradled it in my hands, comma, and waltzed to the dining room to present it to my father. I'll put a period there. On the way, comma, I had to tiptoe over my cousins who looked like a bunch of logs on the floor, period. Suddenly, on the way, don't forget that capital. So we're going through and we're actually going to have all the capitals, where the sentences begin and end, and we'll label it. We have marked our papers so that we have everything labeled for the mechanics, the punctuation, the capitalization. Please notice the 3 highlighted marks I have at the beginning, middle, and end of the organizer. At this point, when you're at this stage, you now are writing in paragraphs because you have a comma live box in the beginning, you have all these actions and reactions in the middle, and of course you have an expanded ending with a reflection. These boxes are paragraphs. I suggest you have the students draw a yellow line at the top of each one of the boxes before they start writing. That yellow line is a warning that they need to indent. This box right here is going to be a paragraph for the beginning of the story. They see the yellow when they go to write, they know to indent, they write out the beginning of their story, which will be a paragraph. When they go to the middle, they see again, it starts, the top of their box starts with that yellow, reminding them, don't forget to indent. You have a new paragraph here. And they orally rehearse their paper, then they go through and they're going to write out the middle of their story. They go to the end box. They're ready to orally rehearse their ending again, but they see the yellow line. That's right, I need to indent. So they orally rehearse, they go to their writing paper, and they indent, and then they start writing out what they rehearsed. It's critical that they have these yellow marks because this is something where students forget to indent because they're concentrating so much on the story and writing the sentences, they forget to do the indentation. These marks here are a wonderful reminder, don't forget to indent. When the students have labeled these yellow marks, remind them what paragraphs are. A group of sentences that go together about one idea. And what are our ideas in our story? We have our beginning idea, our middle idea, and our ending idea. We teach the students beginning, middle, ending ideas, and the reason why we're doing that is this is just at that beginning paragraph level. They're just starting to learn how to paragraph as they're writing these stories. So we want to keep it simple. Beginning, middle, end. On a separate sheet of paper, the students then will start writing out their story. To make their writing successful, what you want to do after they've told the whole story is you want them to work one box at a time. Go to the beginning box, just orally rehearse that. Say the beginning. Now as you're writing on your line paper, say those beginning sentences in the beginning box. So they start saying it, they keep referring to their paper, practicing the sentences, and saying the sentences they write down. They will stay connected to the story, they will reread their sentences, and they will have more fluency in their writing if you have them continue that talking rehearsal as they write. Once they complete writing the beginning of their story, then they go to the middle, orally rehearse the middle of the story. Then they go to write it out, and they again keep saying those sentences as they write, keep referring to their organizer as they're writing them out. And then they do the same for the ending of their story. That will make their writing successful, have fluency, and they will have all the information that they've been planning on their organizer put into their paper. Please turn to page 69 so we can wrap up our personal narrative writing stage 6. Notice you have a sample organizer and student writing on this paper. Our organizer is of the same story that we just completed, but notice this student organizer looks a little different. It's the same story, but it was done a little differently. That's because when I'm filling in these organizers, I don't write these stories ahead of time. I'm not copying from one that's done. I am naturally saying the story and then just figuring out how we want to plan it out. Don't fill in an organizer and use that in your lesson. Just follow the steps. I want to show you that because notice this particular lesson, we started off with the same story, but we planned it out a little bit differently. That's fine. You're only focusing on the steps. The steps work and they make a story. You may have a basic idea of a story, like I told about carrying the cake, but the organizer and how it's planned will evolve with you and the students planning the story together. Don't have something planned ahead of time that you're trying to have the students magically come up with. It will make the lesson stilted and they'll get lost. They'll start guessing instead of just coming up with great ideas by following these different steps and techniques. That's stage 6, personal narrative writing. Follow the steps. And I know your students and you will have a fabulous time writing these types of stories.